Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Hrund Gunnsteinsdottir, an author and from Iceland, and I'll introduce her shortly. But this is going to be a two-part interview that happened over a couple of months, and we had our initial interview, and then later I came to realize there were some things there were some other things I wanted to ask her. So I invited her to come back, and we've spent part of this morning talking. And so I want you to know that so that you'll stick through to the very end so that you can get this last bit that we're talking about today about intuition, and particularly an Icelandic perspective on intuition. So welcome, and thank you for being here. Hello, everyone. This is Ed Brenniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. My guest today is Hrund Gunnsteinsdottir, which is close enough.
Well done, Ed.
And Hrund is from Iceland, has just published a book, and has been introduced to us by Marty Spiegelman, who was on the podcast a few weeks ago. So welcome, Hrund, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and maybe tell us a little bit about Iceland, because I know I'm fascinated by the country, and I know there's it's been in the news lately because of volcanic eruptions and stuff. But give us a kind of an idea of what it's like to be from Iceland and have that history and that culture all part of your life.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Ed, and thank you for inviting me to join your podcast. I've been listening to some of the episodes, and wow, these are some amazing conversations you've had with really, really, really interesting people. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So let's start with Iceland. I mean, I am the only Hrund Gunnsteinsdottir in the world. So let's start with that name.
I'm honored to know you then.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because, and that leads me to my point. The Icelandic population is less than 400,000 people.
Huh.
And I think it's a very deep defining factor for us Icelanders, which we may not really realize like fully, but the more I travel, the more I live abroad, the more that I consider myself also an earthling. So the planet is kind of is my home. I love to visit different places and work in different places. So I think that's kind of a defining factor. Another thing that's really a big characteristic of Iceland, and those who are listening and have visited Iceland will know this. It's the nature. I mean, it's the elements are everywhere. You can never escape them, and you don't want to escape them either. So a part of my day-to-day or kind of mundane activities with friends has been to, after work or at lunchtime, I will go out and run in the national park, or we do skiing, cross-country skiing or ski touring, where you walk up with the skins and then you ski down a mountain and you're all alone in the world. It's just you and your friends. And so Iceland has a lot of space for the few people who live there. It's been a very popular tourist destination in the last years. So people who have visited Iceland in the last years, they also will have noticed that there's actually a lot of people around in remote places. But I'm grown up in that kind of this really deep sense of belonging to the natural world. I used to go out and play in the lava field. And so volcanoes are just part of my DNA. We didn't think about it. For a few years, I traveled with the National Geographic Explorer, which is a ship that circumnavigates Iceland. I was a speaker on board. And I remember another moment where this kind of a mirror was kind of held up to me and reminding me of where I come from, because people said, aren't you terrified of volcano eruptions? Because that's what Iceland is known for. And I was like, no, not at all. And then I just started to think like, why? And I guess in the most recent history, it hasn't, well, that's not really fair to say that, but in the big recent history, it hasn't, people have not lost their lives because of it, although that happened only a few months ago, which is really horrible now in the south of Iceland. But
Yeah.
what I'm grown up being really afraid of in the Icelandic nature are avalanches.
Mm-hmm.
So snow avalanches have been very brutal, and of course the fires have been very brutal to our ancestors, and so I guess the generations before me, they were really afraid of nature, and so being able to harness nature more with industrialization and everything was something that the previous generations did in a different way, I think, than we do now, because now we have generations coming up thinking nature is also incredibly deep and beautiful and kind. You know, it doesn't just take lives, it also gives us so much, and it gives us so much energy. It's hard to describe it. So I guess these are kind of some of the things that come to mind. I mean, about Iceland, another thing that I am extremely proud of is the fact that we had the first democratically elected woman in the world, Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, who is still alive and looks gorgeous, is very intelligent, and keeps on giving of her wisdom and telling people that it's important to be a global citizen and speak different languages, because that deepens your sense of belonging in the world.
Where did the first settlers of Iceland come from?
You know, I think I'm raised up thinking that they came from the Nordic countries.
Yeah.
There are different stories. One is, for example, you know, there were thieves and people who didn't want to pay taxes who fled over to Iceland, and that's where we come from. So it's kind of a sarcastic Icelandic version. And then we have stories of monks coming from Ireland, and there are other stories further way back. So it's kind of like a collection of these things, I think.
Because it sounds like it has a similar background to Scotland, where many of the Vikings and the Picts came there and settled, and then the English migrated north and kind of changed all of that. But yeah, there's this kind of Nordic culture that pervades that whole region of the North Atlantic, and
Yes.
I find it fascinating, and it's interesting that there's been so many television series created about those ancient tribes from
Yes.
Nordic countries.
Yes.
Um, I'm curious as to why the fascination in Hollywood or someplace for that. Is that just good storytelling, or is there something more to that? I don't know, but I have Scottish ancestry as well as Germanic, as we were talking earlier, and so
Yeah, exactly.
so I've been to where my mother's part of my mother's family ancestral home was, which is up at the very tip of the Isle of Lewis in the Hebrides, and which is the northernest part of the Hebrides, and so you can see all of that culture there. You can see how it's cold and it's wet and it's stormy, and I took my family there back in the mid 2000s, and we had a chance to meet a lot of people, and particularly some young people from there, and so you get a sense of these people have had the opportunity to experience life in a more dramatic way that's not urban. And
Right.
and I mean, you were talking about having this connection to nature. To me, that connection to nature is to put us as human beings into a proper relationship.
Yes.
Mountains, and I'm small compared to these mountains. That's kind of the way I see this, and I treat nature with respect and with honor, rather than kind of, okay, how can we extract whatever we can from it?
Yeah, no, this is such a beautiful way of elaborating it, because we love the things that we know, that are familiar, and so it's actually, while I realize that it's a privileged place to live in, whether it's Iceland or somewhere else in the world where you have nature around you. It could be public parks, but we also have cities in the world that have no grass, there are no flowers.
Right.
So these things. So it's a privileged thing to say if you look at the big picture, but it's just so important that we, even if nature is outside and we don't attend to it, we don't pay attention to it, then it's something that it's actually very important that we do that, because it reminds us of who we are, where we come from. We're not divorced from the natural world. And I do think that we've forgotten about it. We've become disconnected from the natural world and our inner souls and selves, and therefore other people as well, to some extent, because and you can just look at the like a snapshot of the planet and the world we live in. It's an evidence of it. And so I'm very passionate about us reconnecting with nature, both in us and around us, and just to remember what it's like to love the natural world and nature in other humans. No one's perfect, no one's a machine. Yeah.
Well, you said you would give presentations, give speeches on these National Geographic trips. What when you were giving these speeches, what were you talking about? What was the topic?
So I would say a few words about Iceland, maybe a little bit of quirky facts, but most of my talking was about the work that I've been doing in the world, which has to do with creativity and intuition. And it has taken the form of film, documentary film, that's been shown worldwide on Netflix and other services. I've also done education, university programs based on these ideas. I've explored the technological revolutions that we're going through and how that affects our intelligence, how it affects the way we learn, what we emphasize as we learn. And I've also talked, which is another thread in my career, quite a lot about sustainability and regenerative sustainability, the circular economy.
Mm-hmm.
But I always come back to the change starts from within.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really where I'm at today. But yeah, so I've kind of woven these different themes into. So my film gave opportunity to speak about all these different things through conversations with the guests on the ship and so on.
So when you talk about intuition, describe what you're talking about, because I'm curious, because I feel very strongly about the importance of intuition, and I'll say more about that, but I'll let you say what you need to say or want to say. But it's a very, I think, a significant part of our human life that we need to nurture. So tell us more specifically what you see as the importance of intuition.
Yeah, so intuition is, we have different ways of explaining intuition, definitely. Everything from irrational impulses we should never trust to something spiritual, sixth sense, and everything in between. I think I've always been intuitive, but to make a long story short, so I grew up in Iceland, and then I move abroad and I do my studies abroad. My dream is to work to make the world a better place. I want to work with the UN. I am very young. I'm only 27 when I start to lead a UN agency in post-war Kosovo. While I'm there, I'm offered a permanent position with the UN, which is a dream come true. So I moved to Geneva, and I'm embarking upon a career where I will travel the world, work at different departments of the UN, and become like a public service servant for the UN until I retire. Lots of different things happened during a very short period of time, about 3 to 4 years. And I ended up collapsing. If I would have known the word burnout at the time, I would have maybe used that. But my interpretation was rather to say I hit a wall, or I collapsed, or I totally lost who I am and why I'm here. So as I try to find my way back, one of the things I do is to resign from the UN. And the reason why I did that was because I felt like we were serving a system instead of the system serving people on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm making a long story short, but there was something in me that felt like we were so much in our heads, and we had created systems around systems about everything, how we think, what we feel, how we do stuff. And it had made us very disconnected from the real world. And at the same time, this is how I felt inside. So I was thinking, is there a relationship between the two? So I resigned from the UN and decided to commit my energy to following through with ideas that I thought would have an impact and that mattered. And I would have the courage to take them into any form and shape they wanted to turn into. So that's why I've had almost 30 titles in my career so far, and I'm turning 50 this year. So it's been a journey. So while I am doing all these different playing all these different roles, working all these different jobs, I'm always thinking about this macro, micro, individual, society, collective, what is consciousness, and all these different things. Very early on, I find my way back through intuition. That's how I'm able to heal with the help of a lot of people in different ways. But that's in short how I came back, because I totally lost connection with my body and my inner voice. So I started to work somehow indirectly around that in education and stuff like that. But when we decided to do a documentary film and travel the world to talk about the world within us, I realized that when I conversed with people, mostly in English, from all these different parts of the world, I realized that the English word intuition has very different understandings and meanings to people, depending on whom I was talking to. And so I go back to my backyard in Iceland, and I totally see the Icelandic word for intuition with fresh eyes. And the word is innsaei. And what that means is, and I love that word, it still gives me goosebumps to talk about it. It's like a word bundle. So it's made up of in and sæi, and it's written like this.
It's the name of your book.
And so this is the book I got today into my hands. Yeah, thank you. And so the word means into or inside. Sæi evokes the sea or to sea. So the way we worked with a word is to break it up into 3 dimensions. InnSæi means the sea within, so the ever-flowing nature of consciousness. It means to see within, to being able to know yourself well enough to understand your fears and biases, and to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes, empathy, compassion. And thirdly, InnSæi means to see from the inside out. And what that means is the world is extremely complex. It's moving incredibly fast. It's constantly moving. Uncertainty is the only certainty. And so if you think about it this way, the ocean is the oldest metaphor for consciousness. And if our world feels like an ocean, sometimes we're lost out on sea and there is no land in sight. Rule number 1 is to keep your head up so you don't drown. And then rule number 2 is to wayfind. What is the direction you want to go in, and how can you know what's your direction? So to see from the inside out refers to your inner compass. And how you are aligned and how you nourish that inner compass is a way of living. It's not something that you do on a quick fix course somewhere. You really need to honor what that means. And so the Icelandic word for intuition, innsaei, is something that I and all the people I worked with around these projects have put a lot of energy and happiness into bringing out into the world.
Would I be correct in assuming that your sense of intuition is a product of actually you being immersed in the natural environment of Iceland? That your body's experience of nature through its senses has shown you things about yourself which now you can articulate and express to the world. Is that a way to talk about this?
So, well, thank you for showing me that and saying that, because I think that's very interesting, and you're probably right, because insight and intuition is embodied knowledge. which is partly why it's so hard for us to take it, to give it equal value to something that's very quantifiable. So the ebb and flow of insight and intuition, I'm just like trying to set my mind around what you just said, is yes, it's very much related to the natural elements. You know, it's sometimes there's stillness and you have clarity in thought. Sometimes the winds are just so aggressive you can't even finish a thought, and all these different things. So it's yeah, I like that metaphor. I think it really helps me understand what it means because I understand it in my body.
Well, I say that because I used to think of myself as a very analytical person, very left brain. And I am. I mean, that's clearly there. But as I advanced in my life, let's put it that way, and I did things that were not based in sitting in a chair and reading a book or watching a screen, but I was outside and doing things, which was the way my childhood was. I was always outside as a child. I began to see things differently because of that, and to see myself in the midst of I mean, I would take my sons. We were involved in the scouting movement, and we go camping, and on 2 big camping trips to New Mexico. On the next to the last day, I was injured, on the trip, and that's where I learned to respect nature as not a safe place, but a place that can teach me something. And in one of those cases, I had a severe ankle sprain, and wasn't sure that I could walk out. But I decided I'm going to walk. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to overcome this through determination, which told me something about myself, which I may have known in some kind of abstract sense. Oh, I believe that this, but now I'm going to go put this to test, and I was able to walk out. Well, let's say hobble out, but still I was able to. So that's why I say there's this intersection between our physical bodies, our minds, our hearts, and the physical world, where we learn things that become the knowledge which we apply in the work that we do with people and institutions.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you for sharing this story. And also the way you describe this. So the premise that I base my book on is that everything is interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
So the world and life is complex. It's not just complicated. And I just want to make that distinction here because I think it's important. So something that is complicated is like a car. You can take it apart, disassemble it, and then you can put the pieces together again and it will work like before. That's machines and cars and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Complex systems are like the Amazon rainforest. It's like the human being. You can't take the Amazon rainforest apart, or you or me, and put us back together and make us work like before.
Right.
And so I think there's a serious healing that we need to be doing, and I think we're doing a lot of it already again in the history of humankind, and that is to really understand how everything is interconnected. That when we put human lives and societies into boxes and silos and bureaucratic silos, they lose the connection that they need to have. And part of the reason why InnSæi, I think, makes so much sense is because the change we need to see in the world today really starts from within. So this even comes from the architect and the main negotiator of the Paris Agreement around the climate crisis. And when we are connected to our inner world and insight and intuition, in the broader sense of the word, we get that intuitively, how everything is interconnected. It doesn't become strenuous effort. We just get it. We understand.
Right.
Both that one thing leads to another, but also that we can't know exactly how. it's not the linear way that we like to think about things. And maybe if I may add one other thing, which I just think is such a beautiful work of a piece of work by Gerd Gigerenzer. He is the former director of the Max Planck Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And he said something like, in a world where where there are known knowns, statistics and analysis apply really well. But in a world where you have uncertainty, it's intuition and heuristics that really apply and work the best. And so when you if we allow ourselves to harness intuition thoroughly, with all that we've been given in terms of the rational, logical, analytical mind, and we train our intuition along with the logical and analytical mind, this is where we reach our highest intelligence. But what has happened in the last years is that we tend to jump to the conclusion that intuition is an impulse, and it's something that people haven't thought through. We have leaders in the world that people sometimes relate to intuitive judgments.
Right.
But I find it very important to say that is not good, well-harnessed intuition.
Right.
What I think out of the blue is not good, well-harnessed intuition, for example.
I totally agree with you, because, and maybe this makes sense, but we've been sort of trained to think that there are only two ways of knowing things. We know through our emotions, we know through our intellect, and it's kind of a binary sort of thing. But this is not what we're talking about. I mean, I'm in agreement with you. I see what you're seeing, and I'm glad you've written your book, because I think there's the dynamic of this, as far as it is very complex, in the sense that you can't take it apart and kind of figure it out in an analytical way. It is what it is, and you must learn to live within it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and it's also, if this sounds foreign to people, and I know that it does to many people and others not, it doesn't mean that it's not okay to pursue it. It's a way of like finding your way, like navigating into that logic. And my book is about also like when you connect within, when you come home to your own body and understand how things look like from there, and you activate your different levels of intelligence and sensing and being and creating, this is when the world can open up to you in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so what we project onto the world is really also how we can experience it. It's a simplistic way of saying it. It varies absolutely after the circumstances of people and everything. But there is a deep wisdom in that. So I think that's also something that really inspired me. Well, it kept me up at night, basically, not to write the book. So I decided to go ahead and write it. But one of the things that I discovered as I was writing it was that being in awe, which I am very often, and I think it's maybe part of my natural upbringing, being brought up in the natural world where the landscape is just so beautiful, you cannot be in awe. I discovered that some years ago, we didn't research the feeling of awe. And you probably know this. And it's only like 10 or 15 years ago that we started to research it in depth. And the conclusion is that people's ability to feel in awe, just to lose track of time and sense that they are part of something much bigger and give into mystery, is a feeling that has been decreasing among human beings. Mm-hmm. And that the classical way to research our ability to be in awe is to look at the starry sky. And what is it, 85 or 95 or 90% of people in North America can't see the Milky Way anymore because of pollution. Stuff like that. I find that really fascinating. What do you think? I can see on your face you're thinking lots of things.
Well, I am thinking lots of things, and I do agree with you, because I think awe has something to do with recognizing that there is something beyond that which we can reach. and not just physically reach out and grab, but reach in terms of really understanding that we have access to a limited amount of knowledge. It may be more knowledge than we've ever had, but it's still limited. And that I think awe is a way of saying, I honor and I respect that which I can never know fully. I mean, in many respects, awe has been a word that has been connected to thinking about God, as a supreme being, as the creator of the world, all of that. I mean, God is beyond this world, and so we live in awe of God. But I think it's, whether you believe in God or not, I think that sense of awe is that sense of having an appreciation that there is that which is beyond me and will always be beyond me, which I can treat with curiosity and with respect and with honor. And it brings a type of balance to our lives where we do not simply assume that I know everything I need to know and therefore I'm in charge.
Yeah, exactly. So true. And I wonder, like, when I listen to you talk and you mention God, I sometimes wonder, are we reluctant to talk about being in awe because some people relate it to religion? And then even if people relate it to spiritualism, they're worried that people will think they are religious. Or, there's really, we've charged a lot of value in different words, and just at the end of the day, these are very human feelings, and it's just that kind of letting go of, as this expression, giving into mystery, or just being in awe because something is just so incredibly beautiful. And if you notice that beauty, it means you have it inside you. Why not celebrate that?
Well, and I'll say this, that my sense of awe is directly connected to God, and it is what has led me into all these other fields of study of history and science and culture and art and psychology. All of those things are ways of understanding, from my perspective, what has been created for us and that we're a part of. But we'll never have a full control over it all. And it'll always be mysterious and always be beckoning us to ask the question of what's there.
Yeah, exactly. And no matter how we describe where it's coming from, I just think that humility,
yeah,
and being aware that, it's nature is in charge. It's like when an avalanche hits you, or when there's a cyclone or whatever, it's like you're not, it doesn't matter if you have 5 PhDs, like it really doesn't matter. And so is that just that, there's the sense of awe. And also how it is, we can be on any given day exposed to something absolutely beautiful out in the natural world, or even something man-made in an arts gallery, and it does not move us a bit because our hearts are closed, we feel horrible about something, we're totally stressed, and we can't notice the beauty around us. And then on another given day, we are set into the same environment and context, and we are totally blown away because our hearts are totally open, and we are open to the beauty that is already right in front of us.
Well, let us finish with a question I've been asking my guests recently, and that is, where do you find hope for today and for tomorrow?
So this is a great question, and it's not very easy, given the state of the world.
I know.
First of all, having hope is an option I choose for myself, because otherwise it's just so hard to wake up in the morning. What gives me hope is to see the best in human beings when we interact with each other, and when people interact with the natural world. So I think that when I say this, I think that these moments are usually very small. They're never going to hit the news, primetime news, because that's where all the horrible things show up most of the time. So that gives me hope. Human beings give me hope. And what we can learn from the natural world also gives me hope.
And I would agree with you and say that it's recognizing that the hope is found in the relationship between all of that, between us
Yes.
people and us as in connection with the natural world. And that relationship is the context for creating the hope that we need to do the things that we must do to care for our communities and the people we love, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, exactly. And I think maybe on that note, I think that in order not to kill hope, because the way we tell stories and the narratives that we uphold and maintain and repeat, it's also so important not to be too cynical about stuff. Because it's so easy to be cynical today. It's like, oh, what does it matter what I vote? You know, we have politicians who are like that, and what does it matter which company I buy from because this and that? You know, it's just try not to be cynical, because it destroys the sincerity and authenticity that is already in every single human being.
Yes, I agree.
We need to enable that instead of suffocating that.
I totally agree. Well, it is wonderful to meet you. I'm really glad to have met you, and I hope that people find your book, and I hope they gain that they either discover their sense of intuition or recover it, so that they may be able to find something about their lives which they did not know about beforehand.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm also very happy to have met you, and thank you for inviting me on your podcast.
Thank you. And we'll put whatever you want into the show notes so that people can find you and they want to connect with you, and particularly so they can find your book. And so that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sounds fantastic. And thank you everyone for watching. Please sign up and hit the like button, and please leave a comment. More and more of you are leaving comments, and that's a wonderful thing. And it's great to see, because it tells me that you're connecting with what our guests are saying, and that's really why I'm doing this. So thank you all, and thank you, Hrund, and we will see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye. After we recorded Hrund and my conversation several months ago, I began to think about the conversation that we had and realized there's some more that I would like to ask her. And so I've asked her to come back and spend a few minutes with me in conversation about her idea about intuition. But I'm going to ask her to restate a couple of the things that she said, so that even though you have heard this just in the last few minutes, it'll be refreshing your own understanding of this in a way that may be helpful. So tell us about the word InnSæi and what that means, and then the three ways of seeing that or using that or applying that.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, so InnSæi is the Icelandic word for intuition, and it's made up of two words: in, which means inside or into, and sæi, which means to see or evokes the sea, the ocean. So the threefold meaning that we've played with describing InnSæi is to say that it means the sea within, referring to the ever-flowing unconsciousness, which is always making cross-fertilizing, making connections beyond the man-made silos. It also means to see within, which means to know yourself well enough to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes, and also to be able to know yourself well enough to be able to discern what are biases and fears and wishful thinking as opposed to good intuitions. And then lastly, InnSæi means to see from the inside out, which means our ability to navigate and wayfind from the inside out.
I really like this, and I think you know that. And our earlier conversation, I think, brings that out, because I think one of the challenges is not just how we as individuals intuitively engage with the world, but how we come together as people into groups and into organizations, into society, or into families, or whatever that may be. So let's talk. This is what I think was missing in our conversation. It's my responsibility, but for not asking you this. But how does this factor into our relationships with one another, and then how does it factor into how we organize the way we do our work together, so that intuition becomes something that we maybe mutually share with one another in the workday?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a very important one. I think to begin with, it's important to say that when I show up at work, let's say, or in a family gathering, aligned with my innsaei, my intuition, it's mine, it's my, let's say, responsibility to align with it. But I can also support you and the others to speak from a place that is their innsaei, their inner compass. Now, this is very important, because let's start with creating a space where people feel comfortable speaking from that place. And that has to do with our ability to listen. I mean, it sounds very simple, but in my experience, deep listening is not that common. It depends on the day. Sometimes we are stressed and overworked and we don't have time. We're in a rush with our projects and we wait to be able to talk, or we wait until the other is finished, or we immediately start to make connections in our head. Oh, this is like this and that. But the person is maybe saying, no, it's not exactly like that. I'm trying to say something else. So we often tend to be quick to shrink what people are trying to elaborate, what people are trying to surface from their sense of place, their sense of possibilities. And we tend to kind of capture that and lock it inside a box that is well familiar to the rest of us, or not necessarily the box that they are wanting to share. Do you see what I mean? So I think deep listening is very important. And the way insight and intuition play into that is, insight and intuition enable us to read what's on the periphery and behind the words. So anyone who is engaged with coaching, is a parent, or is in a leadership position will know that sometimes we don't say exactly what we mean. So our ability to read into people's expressions, like physical expressions, a sense of comfort, to help them bring out what they're trying to say is also very important. So I think that's just one of the things. And then another thing I write about in my book, and I use a lot of, like we've talked about earlier in our conversation, I use a lot of the forces at work in nature. And one of them is the way that we co-regulate. So if I show up at work, I walk into a room, there are 6 people in the room. I show up in the room and immediately I affect the energy in the room. You know how that works. We can't really measure it, but I can come in with a storm over my head, or I can be really open and happy and smile to all of you.
Yeah.
And the way that we show up, if we are beaming our light, if we have our hearts open, if we are warm and nice to be around, and people feel like they can trust us, we are co-regulating with them in the way that they open more up to doing the same. And the same happens in the reverse. So I can shut down my intuition. I can close my heart. I can be very narrow-minded because I'm overly stressed, anxious, whatever the reasons are. We all go through stuff in our lives. And that also has an impact on the conversations that is about to evolve. So I can never stress it enough, the value of and the importance of doing your best to be aligned with your insight, because that's when your energy flows the best. We can never be perfect. We cannot always be present, but we can really, really practice and try to do our best in that sense.
Yeah, in some ways, it's like the conversation that we've had. These two conversations. You're Icelandic. You live in Europe. I live here in America. I've never been to Iceland. You're the first Icelandic person that I've ever met, and yet we have communicated, I think, at a fairly deep level, because I think there are things that we share as human beings that transcend these cultural differences. But the challenge is that we have to put ourselves in a position of allowing us to hear the other person. I think this is what you're saying.
Yeah.
And we have to kind of lay aside our own need to project ourselves into the relationship or into the conversation in order to hear and understand what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think that's very eloquently put, and I very much agree. And the way that we, in a way, complicate relationships and communications by forgetting that we're all human beings and we are as vulnerable, we are as confident and unconfident as anybody, you know. And I think that, you know, Bill George, a Harvard professor and a strong leadership voice, he has also shared in a very profound way the way that when you are a leader and you're running a big corporation, we used to think you needed to be so tough and never show anything, never show any weakness, or even show that you don't know the answers to everything. But the fact is that the more that you share your own challenges with your team and you say, okay, so I'm the CEO of this company and we're going through this journey, and to be honest, I'm not sure how we do this. And then you open up the space. Some people would dismiss this as a weakness, while what you're doing is activating people's humanity. You're saying, like, I'm not a machine. You know, I need your brains and hearts and the way you think, and I want your ideas. And this is also a way that we harness our own insight, but also other people's insight. And then by allowing them to know how we are on that particular day, they also give themselves permission, you know, to build on all of their intelligence and humanity and be who they are and how they show up. And that is so important, because neurologically, the more comfortable and we feel in a space, the more trust we feel, the more able we feel to be able to express even unprocessed thoughts in a way, the more we are able to be like genuine, authentic, and in a spirit of creativity, in the spirit of the explorer, seeing new opportunities, you know. So this is very important.
Well, that's great, and I appreciate you coming back and joining me and talking about this. We're a couple of months after when we first had our conversation. So can you give us a little update on your book and how we may be able to find it wherever we may live?
Yeah, thank you. So my book is already out in the UK. It's available on Amazon around the world, in many places in the world. The book will come out in all continents. It will come out in North America in June next year. It will be translated into 10 languages at least. And so, you know, these are very exciting times. So both in, I already mentioned, in all continents. Yeah, so it should be available for anyone wherever they are. And it will be out in Australia next week.
Oh, good.
It's already available also in South Africa. So, yeah.
Well, congratulations on that. And
thank you so much.
You know, I think intuition is an important knowledge that we have, and I think the more we get in touch with that side of us, I think the better our relationships will be, the better the work we do will be. I think the greater sense of confidence and confidence that we'll have about ourselves. I think it has all kinds of beneficial things that may have been missed by being maybe too analytical in many ways. So
yeah, I think that's really well put. And I just to kind of rephrase the last thing you said, it's important that we trust our own intelligence first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And then we use machines and technology to make the best of what we have, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you all for watching and sticking through to the end and seeing this added conversation that we've had. And I appreciate you liking and signing up. And if you leave a comment, we'd love that. And I'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.